Okay, we are connected. You may begin.
All right. Good afternoon. I'm Dave Anderson, and I serve as chair of the Master's Level Psychology Licensed Clinical Psychotherapy Advisory Committee of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Today is Wednesday, October 1st, 2025, and I ask the members of the advisory committee to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that is being conducted remotely by conference call and other electronic medium. David Stevens.
Here.
Elizabeth Birch.
Here.
Ginger Hill.
Here.
Rebecca Jabara.
Here.
Lauren Luck.
Present.
Sarah McMillan.
Here.
Iris Pauley.
Here.
Robert Pedroza.
Present.
Jennifer Schreiner.
Here.
As I mentioned, Josh Tangaway is doing debriefings today as there was a police officer killed in Hayes. I note the following BSRB staff members are also present: David Fye.
Here.
Leslie Allen.
Here.
Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
Thank you, Dave. This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about any concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or KOMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the executive director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no public comment at this meeting as no individuals requested time for public comment. Because we are conducting this public meeting remotely by conference call and other teleconference ability, I state for the record the following information. Public access to this meeting is being conducted by medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call or by viewing the meeting on the board's YouTube channel. The meeting is conducted remotely, therefore the requirements of the KOMA are not suspended. We will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the KOMA. On August 20th, 2025, we sent notice of the advisory committee meeting to all individuals who had requested notice of such meetings. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other meeting material have been posted on the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda specifically by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if there are any technical issues during the meeting, you may call the board office at 785-296-3240 or send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of the meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And I did check the conference call line before we got started. There's no one currently on the line, but if I hear someone beep over and introduce themselves, I will let you know.
Thank you, Dave. The meeting is now called to order, and the advisory committee will begin its discussion of its first item on the agenda. Are there any modifications to the agenda?
I did have an additional one I wanted to see if I could add. Signing off on psychological evaluations and questions regarding competency evaluations and personnel evaluations and fitness for duty evaluations.
All right, we will add those under possible additional agenda items.
Thanks.
That's okay. Very good. Any other additions to the agenda? Hearing none, I would accept a motion to accept the agenda as indicated.
I move to accept.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you very much. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. That moves us to a review and approval of the minutes from our advisory committee meeting on August 6th of 2025. Any requested modifications to those minutes? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to accept the minutes as printed.
Moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Pose same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. That moves us to the executive director's report. Dave?
All right, thank you, Dave. We'll go through a few updates for you all. First, I want to make you aware there are some legislative interim committees that are meeting, and wanted to let you know that there have been a number of health topics that those committees have been meeting on. Some of them have been special committees that have included both House and Senate members. Some of them have been exclusive to one chamber or the other. But I think relevant to the work of the BSRB and also all of your work as advisory committee members, there was a House special committee that was looking at government oversight. And it really was focused a lot on the operations for one of our fellow agencies, the Board of Nursing. And so that committee has met at least twice to go over different topics and some of their operations, including how the agency informs individuals when their license are getting close to expire, some of the processes in terms of renewals, or what we would call reinstating a license if someone has had a license that expired and they come back to practice. Also a review of their disciplinary processes, and hearing from some individuals who provided testimony to the committee involving some experiences that those individuals had of being licensed, and then having a finding in a disciplinary matter where they had practiced after they had been licensed, and then some of the issues they had encountered in some of those situations. And so if you haven't had the opportunity or you're not familiar with those meetings, they were broadcast on the legislature's YouTube channel. They are available to go back and watch. If you go to the legislature's website, you can look up the page for that actual committee. It was the House Special Committee on Government Oversight, and it will show you the dates that they met, any of the materials that were posted as far as handouts. I think that committee met most recently the same day that we had a board meeting, which was on September 8th, 2025. So you can go to the YouTube channel and view those meetings, or you can go and read some of the testimony that was presented. But just to let you all know, even though it didn't officially, directly involve the BSRB, we were asked to provide some information in preparations for those meetings that just dealt with our own internal processes and what we do when someone has a license that's going to expire, what kind of notifications we send out. And so we've been viewing those meetings, trying to look to see, can we learn from the questions the legislature is asking that agency? Are there processes that when we look back, can we say, we think we're doing the best that we can in this area, or are there areas for improvements? And so I think, all organizations should be doing that kind of work. And I just want to let you know that that's one of the things that we are doing ourselves. One thing that we do, just to let you know, when you have a permanent license and your license is going to expire, our primary method of contacting people is by email. And so we send an email notification 90 days out, 60 days out, and then 30 days out. And then if someone's license does expire, we send a letter to inform them their license is now expired and what that means. And then we also let them know if they wish to continue practicing in the future, that they need to get their license reinstated. And, kind of what they should also avoid if they're not licensed to practice in terms of, providing services under the scope of practice that would require a license. So those are just some of our practices. You may recall in the last few years, the board was able to put forward some items to the legislature that were actually enacted in a few different bills. Some of those have made it easier for people to come back and practice again after their license had been expired. In some cases where individuals stepped away for more than a year, the board was able to decrease the fee to come back, basically cutting it in half to make it easier for people to rejoin the workforce that way. There's also a special 6-month temporary reinstatement license the board had set up. when people do reinstate their licenses, they need to show continuing education hours for the last 2-year time period. And so there are some people that wish to come back and practice and have not completed those hours. So the 6-month temporary reinstatement license allows people to practice for up to 6 months while they are continuing to accrue those continuing education hours. And then once they've satisfied that requirement, then they can get their permanent license reinstated. There were a number of other things that the board was able to successfully have put into law to help out with workforce in that bill that passed in 2023. But just to kind of highlight a couple things in that area. And there was also something the board was able to successfully get put into law. We had heard from some people that said, they're approaching retirement. They have had a significant event happen, let's say with their own health or someone that they were caring for, which really impacted their ability to finish all of their CE hours. And they're trying to decide if this is the time for them to step away from the profession and retire, or if they should renew their license and continue to practice for a few more years. And so to help out in those types of a situation, the board was able to put into place something which allows individuals to request up to 3 months of additional time. And if they are approved for that because of an extenuating circumstance, then it doesn't extend their license, but they can use 3 months of additional time to complete those hours and stay licensed. So we really have been trying to help out with these types of issues when people come to the expiration of their license. Additionally, we've talked a little bit about behind the scenes, some of the work the BSRB has been doing to move our licensing system to the new state enterprise licensing system under Acela. And this will only make the renewal process easier for people and hopefully make the beginning process easier as well to allow individuals to apply for license electronically. So just in case you are hearing about these committees and you are curious what the BSRB is doing, we're always looking for improvements, but we are also listening and trying to learn in terms of legislative priorities and best practices. So just wanted to cue you to those meetings and just kind of remind you about some things that changed recently in the last few years and let you know about that. So moving on to some other items, I do always try to keep the advisory committees updated to items from recent board meetings. And in between your last advisory committee meeting and this meeting, the board had the opportunity to meet twice. The board met on September 8th, 2025 for their regular meeting. And then once a year, the board holds a meeting in person and it is open to the public. And we had put out notice for anybody who wanted to attend, but we do try to move that meeting around the state to give individuals the opportunity to attend if they're not someone who lives in Topeka or able to come to our meetings in person. And so that meeting this year was held in Manhattan, and that was held on September 29th, so just a couple days ago. But I'll start with updates from the September 8th meeting, and then I'll give you a few more updates from items the board looked at yesterday or 2 days ago. So for the September 8th meeting, one of the main items the board worked on at that meeting was continuing to review the unprofessional conduct items. You may recall that this has been an ongoing process where advisory committees made recommendations on changes, and now the board is going item by item to try to get standardized language across professions from some similar items. And if there's items that are missing for one profession, they're having a discussion about is that something that is acceptable, or should there be addition of certain items by profession? So the board continued to work on that at the last meeting. And just to let you know, in case I lose contact with some of these items, I'll go ahead and have Leslie kind of talk about some of the items under the regulation review, but unfortunately there's some IT items going on right now. So I think we should be fine, but in case I drop off, I'll have Leslie kind of talk about some of those items ahead of time, if that is okay with all of you. So, but in terms of other items that were done at that meeting, do want you to know the board did look at partnering with a company called eBoss, which will provide some additional resources for our disciplinary committee. We are always looking in situations to where there is discipline, if the board can make sure that the public is protected, but also make sure if there are licensees that need further direction or assistance in a certain area, that the board is providing resources to help them get back on track. And so what this company will do, it provides certain tests in certain areas to help individuals become more aware with their responsibilities for confidentiality, or in other situations, there's actually papers that they would write and be graded by professionals in certain areas and help them kind of learn and become a better professional in some of those areas. So the board did express favor in having EBOS provide some of those resources to the BSRB under certain conditions. And so the Complaint Review Committee is going to be meeting with that agency to learn more information about what they can offer. Additionally, we talked a little bit about the process we'll be going through today for your advisory committee and the others, going through the regulation review for some of the regulations that have not been updated in a few years, just to see if there's any updates or if there's modifications. And then also the board expressed a desire to start having a conversation on working with practitioners when someone is under direction. We have certain requirements to notify licensees when someone is practicing under supervision, but you also have situations where someone practices under direction, and we could use some additional clarifying language in the statutes and regulations on that. So we will we'll let you know about that as we have more board discussion on that topic. So moving next to the annual meeting that took place yesterday, the board did have an opportunity to talk a little bit about the mission and vision for the agency, and it was decided by the board to go ahead and work for the next year on putting together a strategic plan for the agency that would last for several years. So this will be something the board will be working on over the next year and going through that process, but that is something that's going to be taking a little bit of time. And so that's something the board expressed that they would be working on. Additionally, we reviewed items for legislation that the board had agreed upon last year. And we went item by item to see if the board was supportive of moving forward with those items during the 2026 legislative session. And the board reviewed those items and did agree to move forward on those items for this next session. We also talked about the investigation policy for the agency. And if you're not familiar with that policy document, it is posted on our website. It's been up there for several years now. And the board does review that from time to time. It does provide some guidance to both licensees and members of the public in terms of the processes the board uses. And so the board reviewed that, made a couple of recommended changes to the investigation policy, but overall thought it was still a really helpful document for members of the public and licensees. And so I thought the board meeting yesterday or 2 days ago was very, very helpful for the board to receive some updates on BSRB operations and some planning for the future going forward. So I will go ahead and end my report and see if there's any questions on items from the board meetings or legislative items or anything else.
Thank you, Dave. Any questions? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to old business and a continued review and discussion on draft survey report of licensees.
Okay. And so as we mentioned in the last meeting, we have in your packet included the report from the survey of licensees. This was sent out to all licensees earlier this year. And we were able to collect a lot of feedback in different areas, but in order for us to go through all of that information in a way that is a little bit more digestible, we wanted to go ahead and ask you to focus on 2 questions for discussion at this meeting. And those 2 questions involved question 14 for both the master's level psychologist and clinical psychotherapist. That's on the draft report. It says, over the last 2 years, have you experienced any issues concerning telehealth, either through professional practice or observations of other practitioners? And there are some summarized responses when you look at that report. There is also a reference to the appendices that are on pages 59 and 63. And so as much as possible, we did try to preserve the open field responses from people who responded to the survey. So you can review the summary information, or you can review the open field information there. And I will turn it over to all of you here in a few minutes. I'd love to hear your feedback on things that struck you as you reviewed the summary information, or things that you saw when you were looking through the appendices. The second question we ask you to focus on today involves question 16 for master's level psychologist and question 17 for licensed clinical psychotherapist. And it says, do you currently use artificial intelligence in your practice? And if you do, in what areas do you use AI? And so the responses you can see there in the draft report for master's level psychologist and licensed clinical psychotherapist. And then also later in the report, I believe it's on page 60 and 61, you can see the open field responses for individuals who answered the questions on artificial intelligence. Some of them, the responses were, as much as possible, we try to preserve the voice of individuals. And so you can see some of the candid responses from individuals who answered that question, starting on page 60, and also for the LCPs on page 61. So I think at this point, I will turn it over to all of you for that discussion. And Dave, if you want to, you can start with the question on telehealth, and then go to the question on artificial intelligence. And then I was going to say, if there is, if I am unable to return by that time, the next topic on the agenda is any continued discussion on artificial intelligence. So there may be a nice transition from the survey responses on artificial intelligence to maybe the continuing dialogue for the committee on artificial intelligence. So if I do drop off, just kind of want to give you a nice little bridge until I'm able to return, given the technology issues here. So
Thank you, Dave. All right, so interested in your feedback on the issues related to telehealth. Feel free to unmute and jump in.
One of the bigger issues that we face is always making sure that the patient is within the state of Kansas. And we have to verify that with every session, because we've had some problems with people being in Oklahoma and Missouri and not realizing that it's necessary for them to be in Kansas. So we always check and document.
Ginger, how do you guys do that?
Well, how do we ask or how do we document?
Well, I thought I heard you say you had to verify that they were in the state, so I was just curious what that process looked like.
Well, I mean, it's based on what they say. We ask them at the beginning of this session where they're located currently, in what state, in what town, what location. I mean, we obviously check that just to make sure that televideo is appropriate for the current session. And I mean, we base it off of what they tell us. Hopefully they're being honest with us. So.
Is there discussion about, are people curious as to why you're asking? And is there a discussion about the reason for that?
Sometimes they get frustrated, particularly if it's family therapy and we have a parent that, maybe drives a truck over the road or is on a business trip or something like that. And they get frustrated that they can't participate in that session if they're out of state. But typically if we explain to them that it's a licensure issue, they get it, or they at least accept it.
Very good. Others?
I think for me, another one is making sure we have emergency contacts and knowing where like local hospital might be, or if we need to, just in case there's a safety concern.
Sarah, are you indicating that when you're doing telehealth, the importance of knowing where people are so that if there is an issue in which you might need to refer them someplace or contact local law enforcement, that's why you're
Yeah,
asking?
yes.
Another one that I saw on here that we deal with quite a bit is the confidentiality and addressing that. I think a lot of people think it's okay to be at Pizza Hut or in another room or, walking in the store. So we have to really set those boundaries.
Does that, Iris, I assume, also include like the location that they're in, that people aren't walking in and out, or?
Right, correct. Yeah. So yeah, whether it's at home or in the community, we've had both.
Do you all have providers who are working from home, and what kind of processes do you have in place to make sure that those issues are, taken care of from their end?
We do when there's bad weather. We do allow it. We require Relias trainings on it. So obviously, you have to have a setup where you have a confidential area that you're able to provide it. If you don't, then you're not allowed to do it. So, I mean, those are the biggest ones. We have them go through trainings and then make sure that they have the confidential space to provide it.
Anybody else dealing with those issues? Staff working remotely? Doesn't look like it. Other issues related to the telehealth?
Looks like
Well, go ahead.
insurance was an issue as well, which we don't have come up as much, but I did notice it was noted here quite a bit.
Okay. Lauren?
It's just, I reflect on the burden that this is on the patients. We see patients that will like attempt to drive to Kansas, right, to be able to have their telehealth appointment. And it doesn't really make any sense, right? That's not changing the therapeutic relationship at all. It's just literally the location of the patient and the clinician. And so would certainly hope that if there's any advocacy we could do in terms of patients who live in Kansas who might be stuck in the Kansas City, Missouri side, maybe they're in the hospital room of a loved one and they could still have an appointment, but that they're physically in Missouri. Just wish that patients that lived in Kansas that already had established relationships, that there could be some flexibility in that.
Yeah, I've heard that a number of times. People who work or people who are just out of state for very short periods of time, but need to
Mhm.
check in with their provider.
I would echo that since I work
College
primarily
students.
under 18. And so the children, like if they're seeing a parent and they're across the state line, then they may not be able to access that service, but it's a needed service. And it's just interesting that we can insure vehicles and they can go and have that insurance because they're housed in Kansas. That's where they're
Right.
and their insurance covers them there, and they can drive all over the continental United States, and we're not going to not cover them. But when it becomes for a mental health issue or that they need continuity of services, we allow our insurance for that to say no. So I'm with Lauren. I really echo that there needs to be that advocacy for our patients to be able to receive the services they need because they still need that need regardless of what state they're in.
I love that. And I would add on our college students, right? So think about students who are, 18 and they've established care. They've been with a clinician. A transition to college is they're coming back 4 times a year. Their home address is here in Kansas. They've already established a therapeutic relationship. To have some flexibility to bridge that patient on or have that continuity of care relationship preserved. I mean, I love the car insurance example. It makes no sense. And what I want people to know is it adds to the workforce shortage because starting and ending a therapeutic relationship is time consuming and it has risks in that patients sometimes don't find that continuity in the place that they're going to. So it's worth keeping at top of mind in workforce conversations too. Sometimes where they're going to college might not have access to quickly, available to establish care or services more intensive than what a college campus offers in like the student health center.
And then you're asking the college student as well, depending on where they go to school, to manage the out-of-network benefits issue as well, because again, their insurance would be with parents through Kansas, most likely in that scenario. And so
Yep.
now we're in another state navigating who's going to take my insurance.
Yes, and it seems like the carve out, the insurance companies that the healthcare providers are carving out to the networks feel like they're getting tighter, not wider. I think a lot of people have moved to cash, and so networks have gotten so tight.
So we've had some really interesting things with telehealth in other states. We've reached out to other states to see if it's possible if a client goes to their state, like a neighboring state like Colorado, for example, if it's possible to see that client via telehealth while they're there in Colorado for whatever they're doing, work related or whatever they need. We've reached out to the regulatory board and they've given us permission. So many sessions, so much time to be able to do that. And we have it in writing. So we have an email that, of course, to document all those things. But I think you guys bring up a very good point. I think just having those conversations also with some of the other states where these clients go to, because that's really important for continuity of care. And maybe they're there for a short period of time and they don't want to transition, they don't want to divulge everything that they just divulged and working on. So, but it would be interesting to know, like, instead of, our agency having to reach out to all the neighboring states that we're close to, if there was like a general list of what some of the things, allowances that they would give in situations like that.
Leslie, is that something you can speak to kind of in the reverse, so that if a client came to Kansas who had an established relationship in another state and a provider contacted us about continuing services?
Yes, we're one of the states that are really not helpful. If someone comes to Kansas to go to school, their therapist from the other state, we would require them to get a temporary permit to provide services while they were in Kansas. And if asked the question, even if someone's on vacation here, they shouldn't, our regulation says if the client is in Kansas when the services take place, you have to hold a license in Kansas. So I think this is a really important topic, because everything you said makes really good sense. And it seems to be a problem for people who come to Kansas too, not just for you who are providing services to clients that may not be here when the services take place.
Is that your understanding in terms of the surrounding states? Do we stand out in that area, or are other states easier for people to?
I don't know. I've never asked the question about our surrounding states. I would have to, because if you're providing services in Missouri, we tell you to contact Missouri. So I've never asked that question. That would be something that we might take a look at.
Okay, very good. Yeah, really, I think important issues raised. I know back in the day it was kids whose parents were divorced, and if they spent the summer, out of state with the other parent, that was an issue. So appreciate you all raising those issues. Anybody have any further comments on that? Welcome back, Dave.
Thank you. I was following the message on the YouTube channel, so I've been able to, well, IT has been working on things. But I think I arrived at a good time because I think I can provide a little bit of clarity because I agree with in spirit with a lot of people have mentioned. I do disagree with Leslie a little bit. I don't think I would say our state is unhelpful. I think it's just a very complex set of laws. And one of the biggest things has to do with state sovereignty. I mean, one of the things and the reason why the system is the way that it is because every state said, we will let you put into place laws to make these decisions on who is able to practice in different professions. And that partly is a state safety issue. And we're one of 17 states that allows master's level psychology. And I think one of the reasons why I'm sympathetic to what people are talking about in terms of border states. And I grew up in the Kansas City area, so I frequently went back and forth to Kansas City, Missouri, on a daily basis. But the issue is at some point you do cross over into another state, and that state has the ability to decide on what fields people are able to practice. And Kansas, I'm happy to be in a state that has expanded beyond what some other states have, and to allow master's level psychology. But in a lot of states, the majority of states, they wouldn't allow that type of practice. And so while we look at where the location of the client is for those other states, they may say, well, we don't allow that profession here. And so that's why it gets really complicated. Even for the professions where they do have practice between different states, sometimes it's complicated because of the scope of practice. So we may say that our practitioners can do certain things and others can't. But I think that's kind of been one of the drivers of the multi-state compacts. And I think for licensed psychology, the SIPAC compact was put into place to help people to be able to do telehealth in the different states. But I think there's much more agreement between states in terms of what a PhD, licensed psychologist can do versus what a master's level psychologist could do, even if the states do decide to license master's level psychology. Because we've talked a little bit about we're unique in some ways in that we have tiered licensure for a lot of professions. And I think in some states that even do license master's level psychology, they would not allow independent practice. So they wouldn't have what we would call our licensed clinical psychotherapist. And so I do think Kansas has been helpful to states in terms of developing the out-of-state temporary permit that was designed to allow individuals that practice the independent level in other states the ability to come and do initially up to 15 days of in-state practice in Kansas. And then a few years back, we were able to double that to up to 30 days of in-state practice. But I think it's designed as sort of a one-time thing. And if you really do want to practice here, we would want you to be licensed so that you are contributing license revenue and you are subject to investigations if there's complaints and things like that. So I hopefully that's kind of helpful because I am sympathetic to what people have talked about. And I think the situations to where there are minors or individuals going to college in different states, that's happening more and more. So it's not just about practitioner mobility, although that is important. A lot of it is about client mobility as well. And people are moving around a lot, and sometimes we even take a look at it and we say, where are you located? Assuming that someone's going to stay in a state the entire year. But we know that we get people that, let's say they have a house that they live in when it's cold in Kansas, and that's not here. And then they come back during other parts of the year. So we know we have people that might have a residence at different times of the year. So there's that too. But that leads to the complexity with the telehealth, I think, especially for your profession. given that we're sort of in the minority of states that authorize that level of practice. So.
I apologize. I didn't mean Kansas was unhelpful as a whole. I just meant if someone's on vacation and here, we would require that the person hold a license in Kansas, not just as a whole. We're not bad.
No, and there have been some states like I think Florida is well known as one of the states that allowed a lot of telehealth, but I don't know if they did a really good job of keeping track of everybody who's providing services into the state. And so I think if something had gone wrong, and I'm sure there have been complaints, it might be really challenging to track that person or have any kind of jurisdiction over the person. So just some things to weigh in the process.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate that perspective. Anybody have any further comments on that topic? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to the use of artificial intelligence in practice.
And I can go ahead and comment on this just a little bit. For the survey results, we did have a pretty good response rate for this question. And for the LMLPs, it looks like about maybe 70% or so, at least at the time of the survey, we're not doing telehealth, and actually probably more than that, but there were about 76 of the 113 respondents who mentioned no, but then others said no with some qualifiers. For the LCPs, it was about 88 that just said no out of the 123, but there were some other no's that said qualifiers. But I think even the people who said no, there were still some comments as far as no right now, but we're looking, or my current worksite doesn't allow that. And I think as companies continue to consider alternatives, I think that might change. So, but I'd be really curious to hear from the group and see if anything struck them in certain ways on that topic.
I think there's more polarized opinions than I realized. A lot of people are like, yeah, I love it. And then some, there's some hell no's on there. So I just feel I didn't realize that there would be so many black and white answers to it. I thought most people were more like, maybe I would give it a try or I'd like to learn. So that kind of surprised me a little bit. And I didn't know, I saw one response of somebody was using it for, I know a lot of people and companies are starting to use it to help write progress notes, but I saw there was one comment that said for billing. So that was the first I've heard of using AI for billing. I'm not quite sure how that would work, but
Anyone else have any experiences? Is anyone using it as part of a EMR?
We're getting ready to start it, Dave. We just haven't started yet, so we don't necessarily have any input yet. I would agree. It's definitely very polarized that, we have the folks that are super excited about it because they can't get their notes done on time. And then we have the others that truly worry about ethical issues, and those kinds of things. And they aren't quite sure yet. So
We use a platform here. It overlaps with our EMR. We chose the program that we did because it didn't record word by word the session. It summarized it. And once they're done with the summary, it disappears. It's not stored on a server anywhere for a number of days like some of the other ones that recorded word by word. I have a handful of clinicians that love it. Absolutely don't know how they survived without it. And again, it's summary based. They pulls out summary of the session and they can choose what areas they want to include in their documentation. So ultimately it's on the clinician to review the progress note. The AI is not doing it for them. They have to look at the note, they have to submit the note, make sure everything is appropriate. So there's still that hands-on piece. But I have other clinicians that absolutely don't want anything to do with it. And it's kind of like those that have been in the field for a long time, they don't want to use it. Those that have not, or maybe used AI in their schooling or other things, they are more up for using it. I'm kind of in the middle. But there are some things that I see positive, like consistency with documentation, making sure we're emphasizing the techniques that we're using. I think as clinicians, sometimes we forget the techniques that we're all using, whether it's solution focus, mindfulness, CBT. And so it kind of summarizes it for you to say, like, this is the techniques that you use. This was the wording. And so that's kind of cool. But we decided to go with one that does not record word by word because of the concern of confidentiality and storage and all those things like that. So
This is a dumb question, Jennifer, but so it listens to the session, but it doesn't record it. Is that what you're saying? Okay. I feel like I don't know why that would make me nervous. What happens to that information? I don't know. It's just, I can
it
see.
all goes away. Like, it all goes away once you're done with your note. It all goes away. It's not recorded anywhere. So it's just like a summary.
Gotcha.
Like,
Okay.
there's nothing of, like, you can't replay the session back.
But their laptop is on and listening.
Mhm.
Okay.
And ultimately for us, we want clients' permission. I mean, we ask, like, hey, we have this thing, would you be okay with it? But since it's not, like, recorded, like, I show the clients, this is what it looks like. There's also a summary version on this platform as well, where you could do 6 bullet points, and I call it going from Tiger King to Bridgerton. Because it makes things so nice. Like, you can put bullet points, you can do wrong spelling, 6 bullet points, and it pulls in a nice paragraph for you, and it summarizes. Again, like, you're responsible as a clinician to put it in. Like, ultimately, it's up to you to say what goes in the documentation. But you don't have to do the listening part either. You can just do the bullet points.
Are you finding that certain generations of clients are okay with it and other generations are not okay with it? Or is that a crazy assumption on my part?
I've been surprised by the clients that have been like, yeah. I thought there would have been, but there's not. Actually, it's so much more fearfulness of government. Those individuals that have extreme paranoia or have a lot of things going on, or court-related things, that have been like, no, thank you.
Jennifer, has your quality review staff noticed a difference
In
in terms, like, when they review charts, are they saying the people that use this, their notes are easier to read and it's easier to understand what happened during the session? And
yes. The golden thread that we hear a lot about, we preach a lot about, is definitely in the documentation.
I was going to call on David Stevens. I see we may have just lost him, but one thing I learned about him from our Monday meeting is that he uses AI quite a bit in his professional life and talked a lot about how it had improved productivity. So I was probably just a minute late trying to reach out to him on that.
I would say that we don't use it in our medical records yet. Like, it's not quite there, but I do it for lots of my group planning. Like, hey, these are the parameters I'd like to use. This is the information. make me a 30-minute group for this age group of students, and it spits it out so quickly. So there is some evidence-based information that it can pull through. Like we have a yoga-ish group that we do for our 5th and 6th graders, and it can do a whole plan of that instead of like us going and digging, but you can also give it the prompt. So AI is just as good as the prompt, if that makes sense. So like, just like any technology, it's the user that's driving the product that you get. So it can be like, you can put in evidence-based, that kind of thing. I've also had it be really effective if I'm struggling getting a concept through to a client, or especially a parent, like, how do I water this down for them to understand? And that's been really, really helpful. So I think as a professional, it really gathers a lot of that information very quickly for you. It produces it, but again, you have to be a good steward of the information that you provide and that you have. I think on an environmental side, I think that we're not all ready to make that jump because of the environmental imprint and negative effects that AI are likely going to begin showing on the environment. So getting super excited that it's going to help me write all my notes. I don't think I'm quite there yet, but I think that there are some really helpful tools with it.
Other feedback on AI. Does anyone know of people who are using AI to help with diagnostic work?
I have a therapist that's using it for psychological testing and writing those reports.
Iris, you had unmuted.
Yeah, I was gonna ask Ginger and Jennifer if theirs was gonna be used for treatment planning at all.
No,
Okay.
we're really just starting with progress notes.
Gotcha.
That's all we're opening up at this point. So we'll see how that goes.
Right.
Baby steps.
Anybody else have any further comments they'd like to make? Dave, do you know, in terms of other states, how they're implementing regulations around AI? And are there states that are kind of really out in front in this area?
Yeah, one state notably, I think, is Utah. Utah's had, I don't know if it's a special commission or a group, but about a year ago, they came out with a series of laws really going and addressing a lot of the concerns about artificial intelligence and usage. I'm not very familiar with the extent of all the things that that group did, but if I was going to pinpoint one state, it would probably be Utah. A lot of states are having conversations like we are, trying to figure out how best to approach it. They actually, I think, passed a number of laws recommended by that special group, but I think otherwise, most of the other states that I've heard of, they're just trying to figure out how to approach this from a regulatory board perspective or another perspective.
Well, sometimes it's good not to be first, right? Give other people an opportunity to kind of do some of that work and figure out what some of the pain points are.
Were those laws generally favorable towards the use of AI and helping the profession, or were they like blocking it? Do you know? Now I have to go down this rabbit hole and go find out, but
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I tried to kind of follow if they were talking about things that were similar to what we have been discussing. And I think part of it was, knowing where the data is going. So part of it was making sure that confidentiality type issues were addressed. And then I think there was something about informed consent to make it very clear, if you are using artificial intelligence, what you're using. And then I seem to recall there were some standards in terms of what was acceptable to use, but I don't recall a lot of the detail as far as that goes. And I don't know if it was very specific or very broad, but I know there was probably some discussion on that artificial intelligence will be changing very rapidly. So if you are very specific, that may not be the best approach. So, but yeah, I'd be happy to go and kind of look to see if I could kind of find out what group that was. Because it was within the past year that I remember hearing some of those presentations about how Utah was looking at artificial intelligence and what they've already done so far. So.
I know I got a notice from Virginia where they have a committee working on it, but until then they listed all the standards from the different associations that they are wanting their providers to follow until things get completely written out.
Yeah, I guess that's a point too, right? If there's nothing in place, does that mean that it can be used kind of without disclosure or making recipients of care aware that it's somehow being utilized? Anybody have any final thoughts on that?
It's 2:00.
All right, seeing none, we'll move on to continued discussion on alternative pathways to licensure.
Okay, and I think our discussion at the last meeting, I was going to try to see if I could gather some additional information. I was able to pull some information. I'd reached out to the Association of State and Provincial Psychology Boards, ASPPB, and I mentioned that they had a task force that was looking at master's level psychology. I wasn't able to find out a lot of information on the specific requirements in each state, but I was able to get a list of the other 16 states. So there could be some additional research on looking at those states, but I was able to get a list of those states and also a list of the terms of their professionals. So I thought that might be helpful for you all. Those other 16 states, I'll just kind of go through that list here. Alabama, and their title is psychological technician. There's Alaska, and their title is licensed psychological associate. Arkansas, their title is psychological examiner. California, they have a registered psychological assistant. Kentucky, licensed psychological practitioner or licensed psychological associate. Maine, it is psychological examiner. Michigan, master's limited license. Nebraska, psychological assistant. New Mexico, psychologist associate, supervised. North Carolina, psychological associate. Ohio, they listed their school psychologist. Oregon, psychologist associate -- supervised or independent. Texas, licensed specialist in school psychology or licensed psychological associate. Vermont, psychologist -- masters. Virginia, school psychologist, and then in West Virginia, psychologist, school psychologist, or school psychologist independent practice. So if you are curious, I'll be doing some additional research as well to see if I can, find out. To my knowledge, I don't know that any of those master's level credentials does not require passage of the EPPP, but as you can see there, very few of those states have a title that shows a tier. So like I said, Kansas is a little bit unique in that we have a tier of licensure for most of our professions, one at the non-independent level and then the other at the independent level. So I can't tell you how many of these are allowed to practice independently, but I'm happy to continue to look into that. But if you would like to do some research on your own, I thought maybe this might be helpful if you want to look at a few states. But this is why it also gets tricky, because if you were to look at master's level psychology in different states, they would say we don't have master's level psychologists. But then if you dig deeper into the terminology they use, that's because they're calling them assistants or associates or technicians. And so now at least we have the terminology to work with. We can try to draw down a little bit more and maybe flesh out kind of what the requirements are time-wise, passage point, and that kind of thing. Because states do have the ability to require different pass points when they are licensing in different professions. So the test is still provided by ASPPB. But for our licensed psychologist, it's the 500 pass point. For masters, it's the 400. But to reach the clinical level, you need to get the 500 on the EPPP. So I don't know how that compares to other states, but I'd be happy to continue researching that as well.
Thank you, Dave. I think that's really helpful to understand what states are licensing people, and it will be interesting to see kind of what their scope of practice is.
And Dave, to that point, when we had our conversation as far as should the board recognize APA with the review of master's level programs, I think one of the things we talked about then that makes it tricky is that for the states that only have a supervised level of master's level psychologist, is that what the accreditation of a program is really going towards? For an independent practitioner who's doing work as a licensed psychologist, accreditation by APA, you would seem to say if a program is APA accredited, this is the education necessary for someone to practice independently. But if the APA is not as specific in terms of what it's thinking about in terms of scope of practice, ultimately for master's level practitioners, it's kind of hard to know what to take from APA accreditation of master's level programs, because as you saw with the titles, the scope of practice, I'm sure, is different across states. So.
Very good. Appreciate your work on that, Dave. Anybody else have any questions or comments? All right, seeing none, we'll move to new business. And that starts with a advisory committee member recommendation.
Dave, do you want me to go ahead and kind of frame this topic?
Absolutely.
Okay, so there was a former member of the advisory committee, Bruce Johnson, who had served on the master's level psychology advisory committee, but unfortunately due to some conflicts, he wasn't able to attend meetings, and so he had to step down from his position on the board or on the advisory committee. And so basically what we're asking you to do is to review the two different applicants who had submitted to be added to the advisory committee earlier this year, and make a recommendation on one of those two individuals to be added to the advisory committee as a new member. So just kind of wanted to, we sent out materials. Hopefully you had a chance to go ahead and look at the materials. For those of you who were on the advisory committee prior to July 1st, you've already had a chance to review these two submissions previously. But for those of you that are new to the advisory committee, the way that this process works is that the advisory committee is able to have a discussion in public. If you do choose to vote on recommendations for a new member, there can't be a secret ballot. It has to be a public vote. And you could discuss each of the candidates, or you could say which candidate stuck out the most to you that you would recommend be added. There can be an official vote, or you could do this by consensus. And the advisory committee policy does talk about certain things that the advisory committee is looking for, or that you should think about in terms of selection criteria. But I'll go ahead and turn it all over to you, and you can discuss the two applicants. And then if you have a recommendation, normally what I would say is we would put that in a letter and send it to the chair of the board, but the chair of the board also serves as chair of this advisory committee, so we can transfer that information a little more directly. So I'll turn it back over to you, Dave.
All right. Have you all had the opportunity to review the two potential candidates? And if so, please feel free to unmute and share your thoughts and feelings on those two applicants.
I like that Caitlin specifically listed something, an area of interest for discussion, discussing the ASPPB regulation changes. I don't know that to me so they're doing their work and their background. They have ideas they want to bring. It's I don't know that stuck out to me. Oh, I mean, their experience is also, I think, quite good and thorough. But that kind of sets it apart for me if you're taking an active role in informing yourself on what's happening.
Thank you. Others?
I agree. I thought that was also interesting that it stood out as well. But I will say on the other candidate, I thought it was interesting that she's practiced in another state. So that might also bring another perspective to the council as well. But those were kind of my thoughts on reviewing both.
Iris, how about you?
Yeah, one thing I noticed with Caitlin too, she's also involved in KMAP or the Kansas Association for Master Level Psych. So I thought that was a positive.
It really appears that Caitlin is working in several different parts of this field. I mean, I like that has the testing experience, as well as the treatment experience, and I'm not seeing that so much on the other one. So I think she would be able to give a little more input on that.
Very good. Rebecca, Jennifer?
I agree with what's been said. I think it stood out that she's done a little bit of research, Caitlin has, and has some ideas and some things that she wants to bring up and discuss. I think that's always helpful. I did like the other applicant's current position is at the university. I thought that would be a unique view too, but so there were positives with both, but I think Caitlin probably stood out a little bit better or a little bit more to me to be a good member of the advisory committee.
Very good.
I agree. I wish we could have both, but I would agree that I think Caitlin stood out more to me as well.
Thank you. Sarah?
I don't know Caitlin personally, but what I have seen is she's very active in our community, reaches out to both nonprofits and private practices, and then just other community organizations on a regular basis. So I feel like she's just very active in the field, it seems like, and in the community.
All right. Jennifer?
I agree with everyone's statements.
All right. So is there a consensus? I mean, obviously two good candidates, but a consensus that we extend an invitation to Caitlin?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Very good. Well, thank you all for your input on that. And Dave, we'll go ahead and plan to make that appointment at our next board meeting. Is that the way that works?
Yes, so the chair of the board has the authority to appoint members to the advisory committee, and that tends to be done at the regular board meetings. So the board is meeting the second Monday in November, so we'll put it as an agenda item.
Very good. Thank you all. Okay, that takes us to a review of regulations, Dave.
All right, and thank you, Dave. At the last meeting, we discussed, there are a number of responsibilities for advisory committee members. One of those is making recommendations to the board on either items referred to it by the board or by the executive director, or items that you come up on your own and would like to have passed back to the board for consideration. There was a bill that passed a few years ago that's asked each state agency to basically review all of their regulations and provide information back to the legislature if those regulations were still necessary for implementation of state law. If not, were they still helpful? So what we've been doing over the last few years has been bringing the regulations to the advisory committees, and we brought some of the meatier ones to you first, like the unprofessional conduct regulations, one about continuing education, documentation of continuing education, and then some others. However, there have been a number of regulations that have not been reviewed by the advisory committees in the last few years. And so we wanted to go ahead and bring some of those smaller or less controversial regulations to you so that you would have
Well, David Phi is frozen.
Yeah, I see that. So Leslie, were you going to walk us through those?
So I didn't know how in depth he wanted to get in this list of regulations. But I did look at the regulations that he sent you, and then of course he's reviewed them. The exam 102-4-5A, the exam regulation obviously needs changes. We have started the process of making those changes to allow people who have the LMLP working toward a clinical license be authorized to sit for the EPPP again before they um, finish their hours. And then in addition to that, we need to change the scores from 60% to 400 and from 70% to 500. And then there's other things that are in there regarding, like sending us the form and the fee, which we don't do anymore. Everything goes straight through the exam companies now.
Looks like Dave's back.
Yeah, I was going to say, so now I'll ask Dave how in depth he wanted to go. Let him finish his lead in.
Apologies again. But, no, I appreciate Leslie. You kind of starting to discuss, and Leslie and I did have a short conversation ahead of time. Just we wanted to go through some of these ones that I mentioned kind of before I had to step away for a second. That these are some of the less controversial ones, more of the ones that are helpful just to take the statutory framework and give a few more details. But some of these do need some minor edits. So what Leslie and I have done is we've marked up a few things, and we want to go through these with you and pinpoint the items that we would recommend for changes. And then if you are supportive of those changes, we'll probably see if there's any objections or if there's consensus. And if you're in agreement, we'll move these items to the board for the board's review. At the same time, if you do spot items or have questions, this is a good opportunity for you to ask questions and we can have some discussion about why the language is a certain way, or if you have other recommended changes, we can incorporate those too. So I thought we would just take each one item by item. We have a little bit of time today. And so I thought we would maybe start with KAR 102-4-4A, the applications for licensure regulation. And I think I should be able to, I'll share my screen here so you can kind of see. And then we'll go through. I've highlighted and sort of marked a few items, but Leslie has probably also done the same. And so I will start with my items and then we can kind of hear what Leslie has as well. So I'll share my screen here.
I lost my first page. I apologize.
Well, you should be able to see my screen.
There we go.
This is KAR 102-4-4A, applications for licensure. And what I had marked on here, as you can see at the beginning, it does say that each applicant for licensure will request an appropriate license application form from the director of the board. I think we can go ahead and just change that to the board, which is usually the terminology we use for the agency. Everything is online now and a lot more accessible than maybe previously. And so we can go ahead and I would recommend just striking the words director of so it just says from the board. And then another item that I had highlighted for a possible recommended change, down towards the end of the regulation, there is a section that basically talks about what used to be a requirement that really is no longer something that is recognized. It says under this language here, under little e, 1A, it says, except as provided in one of the other paragraphs, the temporary license shall expire after 12 months if the applicant has not taken the examination at least one time. That is not something that we have in the statute anymore. I think it used to say that, and then it was changed. So to make sure the regulation syncs up with the language that is currently in the statute, we don't monitor or have a requirement how soon you need to take the examination. Now, if we're talking about best practices and something that if someone asked me, I would say it's to your advantage based on what I've seen to take it as early as possible. But I think the issue previously was when this wasn't a statute, it was very challenging for the board to track and also enforce, and that was why it was removed. So I would recommend striking that previous reference. And then in little b, it also makes reference to having to take the exam once in the first 12 months and then some conditions that follow. And since we don't recognize that anymore, I would recommend striking that language in A and B there. So anybody have questions about those items that I highlighted so far? And then Leslie, did you have other recommended changes for this regulation?
I did have one question at the end. We have a definition for extenuating circumstances, and that has now been defined in the definition regulation for LMLPs and LCPs. So I wondered if we should just point to extenuating circumstances is defined in 102-4-1A.
Yeah, I had seen that as well, and I had a similar thought. It does seem a little redundant since we already have that elsewhere, and we can just make reference back to that regulation since it is included in the definition section or in the statute now in a lot of professions. So
Yeah, that's the only thing I had in addition.
okay. Most of this just kind of provides some clarity on items that are already in the statute when someone is applying for licensure, but we wanted to give the opportunity to each of you if you had questions about those recommended changes, or if there were other items that you had questions about or other recommended changes that you wanted to make. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen so we can see everyone, and then let me know if there are other items that you would recommend changing from that regulation, or if you have any questions. Is there consensus to move forward with the recommendations that Leslie and I highlighted there? Looks like there is consensus. So, okay, we'll move to the next regulation in your packet, and I'll share my screen again. The next regulation, we'll go to the next one. That is 102-4-4B, application for licensure based on reciprocity. And actually, I'll turn it over to Leslie. Leslie, were you able to review this and see if there's any items that needed to be updated in the reciprocity application or the regulation?
Yes, so the reciprocity regulation needs to be updated since the statute change. Now it only requires that a person be licensed for 1 year with a similar scope of practice, and it does not have a requirement that the person have practiced for 4 years or 5 years. So this regulation, I have started it. I think it's ready to go actually with the needed changes, but those are the two big changes. The ways you can meet for clinical license remain the same. So that part doesn't need to change, but it's substantially equivalent requirements or licensed for 1 year with a similar scope of practice.
Okay. And this is a little bit of the history of the statutes. Previously, was it a 5-year requirement originally, and then it went to 48 of the last 54 months?
Yeah. Yes.
In a separate standalone statute. And then in 2021, the legislature passed what has sometimes been called a universal licensure bill. It was never called that at the time, but it created a new pathway for certain military applicants, military spouses, and other individuals to apply for reciprocity with a shorter time frame. And the board put forward a change to the statute on reciprocity for all the professions in 23, and that was passed to make that consistent with that military reciprocity bill. So I think it makes sense to go ahead and sync this language up and make it match the 1 year requirement for reciprocity versus the previous references. Okay. So any other items that you had seen for possible change in this regulation?
No.
Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen here and see if there's any questions or any other recommended changes from the members of the advisory committee. Okay, if there's not, is there consensus to go ahead and move forward with these recommended changes?
Yes.
Okay. I see a lot of head nods, so I will take that as consensus since we'll move these recommended changes onto the board. I'll go ahead and share my screen again. We can move to the next regulation. The next one is 102-4-5A examination requirements. And so, Leslie, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the recommended changes for this one that you and I had discussed earlier today?
Yes, this is the one I was talking with the committee about while Dave was offline. So we want to change the lead in who says when someone submits an application, because we want to allow LMLPs to test before they finish their hours for the clinical level. And then we need to change the pass rate from percent to 400. And then in 2, change 70 to 500. And let me see. The registration forms in B as in boy needs to be taken away. That's all done through the examination company. So we would have some kind of language saying that that's how it would be done, as well as C if they don't pass their exam, or that's D, sorry. So all of B, C, and D need to be updated because we aren't so involved in the process. We used to actually have applicants come in and sit in our boardroom and take the exam, and now we don't do that. So, and I think those are all the changes I would suggest for that one.
Okay. Well, I'll stop sharing my screen and see if there's any questions or other recommended changes from the advisory committee.
Is there a limit on how many times they can take it once they've passed it at the LMLP level?
So we do not limit how many times someone can take an exam. ASPPB says that an applicant may only sit 4 times in a calendar year.
Okay, I knew there was
But they
some kind
don't
of
even,
cap. Okay.
yeah,
Okay. And that's for anyone. It doesn't matter level of licensure.
yes, that's correct.
Thank
It's
you.
just based on ASPPB's policy.
Okay, gotcha.
Good question. Anybody else have any questions or other recommended changes?
Would they be able to sit for that as soon as they want? There would be no time constraints on that at all, as soon as they had their LMLP?
Um, I believe so. The board hasn't approved language, but I think that was the hope.
I really like that, and I think that will really be appreciated.
Yeah, I think the board had talked about that for both master's level psychology and marriage and family therapy, since it's the same examination for both. So, yep. Okay. Well, any other questions or other requested changes? If not, then is there consensus to move forward with recommended changes? Okay. And I apologize. I know this is a little tedious, but like I said, some of these are short. They may be a paragraph, maybe a page, but this will be helpful because at the beginning of next year, I'll be asked to go through all the regulations for every profession and fill out a series of questions. And what I'd like to be able to do is to say, in the last 5 years, we have gone through every regulation and had our advisory committees review these with the opportunity to make changes to updates. And so that way we can show we're being diligent as far as being good stewards of the regulations and making sure that we are doing the cleanup necessary. So, well, I'll go back to the packet of regulations and we'll move on to the next one, and that is KAR 102-4-6A, academically supervised practicum. And Leslie, did you have any recommended changes for this regulation?
I did. The main change is that that we add either practicum and internship or practicum or its equivalent, because when we get forms filled out by universities, if there were two, they sometimes don't include the hours for both. So I thought it would be helpful because we allow hours from both practicum and, internship before the degree is granted. And then I would ask the committee to look at the language of this regulation and what's included to see if there are any language changes, because this was last done in 2008. And I know things, just naturally progress and our words change in how we describe things. So I would ask that you guys take a look at this one to see if there are any other changes that should be made.
So Leslie, is this one that, based on some of the detail here and your last comment, if the committee is not ready to make recommendations today, is this one of these that you would probably suggest we table versus moving forward to the board at this time?
Yes. I mean, it may be general enough that it's okay, but because it's been so long, I want to make sure. So, yes.
Okay. And I realize, it may be a little daunting. At the last meeting, we gave you a packet of 10 different regulations or so and asked you to review them all and come with changes. But I think maybe if we go through this today and narrow it down, maybe you can kind of focus on this one for next time if you don't have thoughts today. But does anybody have any questions or thoughts on recommended changes, either something that you had already thought of or something in response to what Leslie had said?
I guess it's a question. I don't know if it's a question or thought. I was just looking at let me see what it's.
Sorry, I'll share that again.
Yeah, no, it's okay. It says B by the nature at the bottom of the first page, by the nature of the function, it talks about the following practice activities and experience. I was just curious about that part. Diagnosis, measuring, and testing personalities, interdisciplinary collaboration, treatment, and I didn't know if the treatment interventions with client, if that part, that last statement there on the top of the second page means that out the time that they have with a supervisor in the therapy setting. I think that's an important part, and I wasn't sure where if that's what that part means, the treatment interventions with client. Does that mean work in therapy, or does that, I guess I'm a little unclear on what that last statement means for there on the top of the second page or if anybody has any idea of if that means therapeutical setting. Does that make sense?
I believe that's what it's intended to mean, but
Okay.
if it should be more specific, that's something we can definitely.
I guess I'd be curious of other interpretations on, that statement, treatment interventions with a client or patient population. I like the presenting a diverse set. I like that second part. I just wasn't sure if others interpret that as within the therapy setting or not.
Any thoughts from other members of the advisory committee on that topic? And Rebecca, did you have any questions or comments as far as other items when you were looking through the regulation?
No, not so far. That was the only thing that stuck out, was just wasn't quite sure what that would look like or what that interpretation was.
Okay.
I had a question about item number 6, where it talks about supervisor provided the applicant with on-site supervision. And is on-site, I mean, have we made now allowances for supervision provided by, Zoom and other forms?
Yes, I believe we have. I think perhaps number 6, face-to-face supervision and maybe on-site should be stricken.
Okay, I think that would clarify that.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on this one?
Do we, I'm wondering, just because sometimes we get these kind of strange situations where supervisors will kind of pass people in terms of their practicum, but then not give them, or when the application comes in, they do not recommend them for licensure. And I wonder if there's a way to clarify that.
When you say clarify that,
In terms of, should we have some language in our regulations about, what that means? I know we've just stumbled over it a couple of times, and it's then hard for the board when we get these situations where people's have passed their practicum classes, but then the same supervisor won't recommend them for licensure. I don't know if this is a place to address that, or.
so you're talking about some additional language here that would say, if a supervisor does not recommend someone for licensure, they shall provide adequate information to the board in support of their opinion on that matter, or something like that.
Yeah, or just that if they're passing them, if they're saying they passed the class and they've done everything they needed to do for that, but then turn around and say, I mean, that's been kind of the struggle for us, is how does somebody, and maybe somebody here has had an experience like that, where they differentiate that and say, yeah, I tell the university that they've passed this class, practicum class, but then when it comes to licensure, I've said I don't recommend them. That just has always struck the board as kind of a strange situation for us.
Yeah, I agree that is strange, but I had thought of it in that the relationship between the trainee and the university is based on the hours and the requirement of being there and completing all the steps. And you can complete all of the steps and still, I guess, from a clinical perspective, the person that's evaluating your actual therapy, not the one who's like recording what gets put on your transcript. I would think it's really valuable to still let people check the no box, but I completely agree that they should be required to provide adequate information for the board and explain the nuances in that. I'm assuming that's a pretty low occurrence, but when it happens, I think it's worth understanding what the clinical concern was.
Some level of accountability, like even just the verb, like submit in writing. I don't know. The details can be there, but then yeah, you have to submit in writing why, and is there any recourse for the person that is it try again in 90 days, 6 months? You've spent a lot of time and effort, and one person kind of puts a stop to that. I think that's just a level of responsibility that needs accountability of some kind, at least to like they tell us, explain. Um, Even if it's just please submit, submit something in writing of why, not just checking a box. That feels insufficient. Yeah, that I agree. That feels insufficient to me.
I would piggyback on that and agree as well. And what would be the appeal process for the applicant? And you just don't ever want to get into a case where, maybe they did all their hours, they fulfilled all of the boxes, they did all of the regular, and then this is just a true conflict of personality or something, which I think it would take a lot for somebody to mark no, but also what's that person's recourse? Like how do they know?
So when
Fix
an
it.
applicant,
Mhm.
when someone applies, I think that might be something that if we were going to put it in something, it would be maybe the application reg, where we require the on-site supervisor to fill out a professional reference form, because that's when they say yes or no or raise any concerns. Um, and in speaking to the supervisors, they say that it's a different set of requirements to pass a practicum than for licensure. And to a certain degree, I understand that. But sometimes when they have all average or above average ratings, there's like no concerns listed in the practicum review form. That's a little concerning, because how's the applicant to know if that hasn't been discussed? So that's my little speech about it. But if that happens, we do take that to the board. Often I ask the applicant to send me their practicum review form from the university. They aren't required to do that, but it does help show, if there were concerns during the practicum. And depending on what they are, the board may ask them to respond to what the practicum supervisor wrote in their evaluation. Um, they may then license them, just, without any conditions. They may require that the applicant or request that the applicant complete a consent agreement and order, where we receive reports to show that in the areas of concerns, these are being reviewed, and that they're progressing satisfactorily in their practice for 1 or 2 years, again, depending on the severity of the concerns. So they do have an option. I mean, you do have an opportunity to speak. And then in the end, if the applicant disagrees with even doing a consent order, then they would be denied. But in the denial, that gives them the right to request a hearing. And then they would go before a hearing panel and show why they feel that this was not accurate and why they should be licensed. So they do have opportunity to speak with the board and present information. Or even if you don't add it to the regulation, if currently we have professional reference forms and they're the same for your general references and your practicum supervisor, we could put a specific addition for the practicum supervisor reference that says if you have concerns, we need a detailed explanation and, have it done that way if it's not done in the regulation.
And that may be a better way to deal with it. Dave, I'm noticing the time, and I want to make sure Iris gets an opportunity to discuss her additional agenda item.
Yeah, I think we should be good to go ahead and table this one, and then we can pick up the other ones as we go through at the next meeting. I think that should be fine.
Perfect. All right, Iris, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I just had some questions that I wanted to get some feedback on psychological testing. I've had a psychologist here at the center for a long time, who is moving. And so we've had some discussions around, so I will no longer have one. And so we were discussing on signing off on psychological testing. And so my question was, I know LMLPs require the level of oversight, obviously. Would their testing require a signature of a LP on psychological testing? Or could a LCP sign off on those?
So my understanding, to my knowledge, our statutes and regulations are silent on signing off.
I couldn't find it.
Yeah, that's why. That's more of an agency requirement or insurance requirement. Obviously, the LMLP would need to, their supervisor would need to be addressing that. But our statutes and regs don't speak to making it a requirement that someone signs off on something.
Okay. Okay. Do any of you guys have feedback on that and how you deal with that? I know some of the insurances may require that, so I may need to look into that. I would just also looking, I think it also becomes an issue of what we were talking about earlier of just not being recognized nationally. Like we were looking into some of the competency evals, and so she was arguing with me that a psychologist needs to sign off on the competency evals that we do.
Iris, I work for the school district, and there are two of us that do mental health evaluations. Before I had my LCP and I was LMLP, and my LCP supervisor would sign off on all my evals. But now that I have my LCP, I don't have an LP signing off on
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me. Yeah. Okay, I appreciate that. I just needed some validation there. I mean, we've been through the training, so I think it's partially because some of the states don't recognize it, and so some of that isn't addressed. Like some of the stuff I'm getting is national.
Yeah. But and then of course with the school district, it's provided for the parents. We don't submit to insurance. We don't bill insurance. So
Right.
but I don't think that I I don't think you need an LP to sign off on that. I think the LCP is able to do that. And
Right.
an LP under supervision.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I ask, is the competency for like criminal court, like
Yeah.
state court, federal court? Like I think that you may be even getting into some weird hairs there too, because at the federal level, because our licensure is so specific to Kansas, like we've talked about, you may be getting into some area there.
It is. And so, yeah, I think some of it can be federal, but I mean, we're doing it for Kansas. So, I mean, across the state, there's not, at community mental health centers, there's not a ton of psychologists doing them. So I think there's all different levels doing them. And not all of them require psych testing either. So it kind of depends on doing that as well. So I know there's even, yeah, there's all levels of disciplines doing
I
them.
feel like I've even seen clinical social workers
Yeah.
submitting report
Mm-hmm.
possibly. Yeah.
There is. And so, yeah, I just wanted to get some feedback and make sure I wasn't, yeah, being validated with other professionals, that way. So, and I couldn't find it in the regs, so I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something there. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Iris, is Dave Barnum still doing those competency
He
trainings?
does. He does. Yeah, he'd be a good resource too, to reach out on that too.
Yeah.
Thank
All right.
you.
Yeah. Was that all you needed?
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Very good. Well, Dave, we got a few minutes left. You want to back up and look at a different reg?
Sure. We can go through a couple more of these.
Okay.
I'll share my screen again and we can talk about a couple more. Okay, so I believe we talked about the academically supervised practicum. The next one would be KAR 102-4-6B, postgraduate hours in lieu of practicum. And Leslie, did you have any recommended changes for this regulation?
I did not, unless just that the committee look at it and see if they think if anything needs to be updated with language, but I think it's fine. Oh,
Yeah.
yep. Down at the bottom, number C says 4,000 hours.
Right. We had reduced the number of hours for all professions down to 3,000. So that I just saw that small item, but just wanted to highlight that. But aside from that, I didn't see any other changes. So
I would agree. Yeah.
okay. Any questions by advisory committee members or any other recommended changes? Is there consensus to move forward with that minor change? Okay, sounds good. So there's consensus. So we'll go ahead and move that one forward. I'll share my screen again here. And then moving to the next. This is KAR 102-4-9A, renewal and reinstatement. And I'll just go through a few of these that I had selected for discussion and possible edits. Under item B, the current language talks about if someone is renewing their license and then paying the fee before the license expires, there's certain requirements. However, if they do want to reinstate the license after their license has expired, there is a reference to paying the renewal fee plus the late charge that is set forth in the regulation. And that is true of individuals who just have their license expire within a year. But there was some extra language I referenced earlier where the board said if someone had been out of the profession for at least a year and they're really coming back to the profession, the cost is cut in half. So we could add some additional language referencing the two different amounts, based on how long someone has essentially had an expired license. And then there was also some language here that I thought would be suitable to be struck. It said each applicant who fails to meet the statutory deadline for reinstatement may submit a new licensure application. We don't have deadlines. You can always reinstate an application, even if it's been a long period of time. And so that is something that I think is suitable to be removed. Also, just as a reason for that, we don't want someone to have confusion about looking at our license portal and not being able to find the practitioner. So as much as possible, we want people to continue on with their same license number. So that is part of the reason for that. And then moving a little bit further down in section a little D, it says each individual who holds a license but fails to renew a license before the license expires and who thereafter applies for renewal of the license shall indicate on the reinstatement application form, yada, yada, yada. If your license has expired, you really can't renew it at that point. You would have to get it reinstated. So my recommended change was just clarify that process and remove the reference to the renewal if someone already has an expired license, and just have it be that it's a reinstatement at that point for consistency. So, but any questions on that, or Leslie, did you have other recommended changes for this regulation?
I just thought that because it talks about reinstatement, that maybe we should add something saying that they can get the reinstatement temporary if their license has been expired for more than 1 year. That would allow them to practice while they do their CEUs.
Yeah, that's a good idea. We can make reference to that. We talked about that a little bit earlier in the meeting. That was one of the things the board put into place and had passed in a statute back in 2023 to create that new temporary reinstatement license for people to be able to come back to practice earlier than completing all of their CE hours. So we can make a reference to that. So any questions or any other recommended changes from members of the advisory committee?
I have a very weird question.
Sure.
So, if let's say somebody was grandfathered in as an LCP, meaning that they didn't have to take the exam, which I don't know when that happened, so I apologize. But let's say that they were an LCP beforehand, didn't take the EPPP to do that level, was out of practice for a while, failed to renew their license, and they come back in. What license do they hold at that point?
I think
They would reinstate the LCP.
Mhm.
They would not have to reapply, and whatever license you held when it expired, you can reinstate that license.
Okay.
We wouldn't require them to sit for the exam.
Okay.
Yeah, there are some other states or jurisdictions that would say, you can renew your license or reinstate your license for a certain period of time, and then after, 10 years or 20 years, you would need to take the exam again. But that's not what we have here. So nobody would need to go back and take the exam again. Once you've passed that score, we'll recognize that score forever. So.
Yeah, but if they, like Leslie's saying, if they never took it, they were just grandfathered in. If they were LCP and they were, gone for a couple of years, they will come back as an LCP. Okay.
That's correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you held a license, then if you come back, you would still be able to reinstate that original license. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions from anyone or other recommended changes? If not, then is there consensus to move forward with the recommended changes? Looks like there is. Okay, then we will move these ones forward, and I'll reshare my screen here. Okay, moving next to KAR 102-4-9B, renewal audit. As I was going through this, I just noticed one thing that we've seen in a few other regulations that go back a ways. Under little c number 2, it basically is talking about what you need to supply if you are selected for audit. Number 2 says the original continuing education documents. And since we deal with most things electronically now, there's no need for us to have the original documents. You can send a scanned copy or, so just striking the word original, I think would be fine. But that's really the only edit that I saw. Leslie, did you see any edits on here? Do you have any recommended changes?
No, the original, and then I didn't know if there was a way to put in the regulation, since we use CE Broker, that if they have an active account, they don't have to submit the forms, but I don't know if that's necessary. But if it is allowable, it would be clear
Hmm.
to the licensees.
Okay.
But the whole third party stuff, we may not be able to do that, but
Yeah. Well, and there may be a section here that says it's submitted to the board. Maybe we could add some language that says, submit it to the board or to a entity approved by the board, because that would allow the use of third parties without us having to, if there's a change, maybe something like that. So,
yeah, I thought something like that would be good.
okay. Any other questions or recommended changes from any other members of the advisory committee? Is there consensus to move forward on these recommendations? Okay, then we'll go ahead and do that. Looks like there is consensus. Maybe we have time to get through one more, maybe. Let's see. Move next. Tell you what, this one is a little bit tricky. So let's go ahead and table this one, 102-4-14, because I think for some of you, you may have questions about this, but I would encourage you to go and check the statutory citations. This does parallel with some of those, but that's not something that we talk about very often. So maybe between now and the next meeting, take a look at those statutes. If you look at the next one, KAR 102-4-15, designation of referral source for use in the diagnosis and treatment of mental disorders. This basically just references that we're currently using the 5th edition of the DSM. And so
It's 3:00.
it is pretty consistent across professions, but I just wanted to go ahead and show it to you, this very small regulation, and see if you had any recommended changes or questions. And Leslie, did you have any recommended changes on this one?
Well, they did, although I didn't think they were going to, they have put out a new DSM 5 TR. And I think technically it should be updated, but
Is there a way to
that's
just
kind of
put like current diagnostic instead of you having to change it every time? Is there just a way to say,
no, they won't let us do that.
oh,
That's why, yeah, they don't want us to give away our authority without us being able to look at the document before we authorize its use.
I think historically there has been some discussion about what is considered an impairment under the DSM. At different times, things have changed, and some of that does get a little political. And so I think that is one of the reasons why they've had a specific reference for this at times. So
Would it be cheating to just mirror what the LPs are saying in their language? Or to state that our master's team would mirror what our doctoral level providers were doing?
well, and I think each of the professions likely has a similar regulation like this. So
It's the same regulation across professions.
Yeah. The question is whether 5 covers things sufficiently or whether there needs to be a small update given what is currently being used. So
Well, I think we should update it to say the TR.
okay.
Agreed.
Any questions or other recommended changes? Okay. Is there a recommendation to move forward with that recommended change for the update? If you all have about one more minute, I can do the last one unless we need to end. You have about one more minute for the last one? Okay.
I will have to leave. I'm sorry.
I have
So-
a hard stop.
Okay.
I'm always late for a meeting. Sorry.
That's all right. Looks like that would put us at 6, so we would still have a quorum. Dave, it's up to you. Would you like us to do the last one or go ahead and
Sure,
end?
let's go ahead.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and do the last one, and we'll verify that we still have quorum before we ask for any kind of a recommendation. So the last one is KAR 102-4-16, services rendered to individuals located in this state. And this is one that is also consistent with most of the other professions. It basically says that when we look at practice, we would look at the location of the client. And so if someone is performing services, we would look at the location of the client if the client was located in the state, but also under B, we would be looking at if someone represents themselves as a master's level psychologist or licensed clinical psychotherapist available to perform any of the services if they are physically located in the state. So, and Leslie, do you have any comment on this one or anything you would add about this regulation?
No. I thought it said something about. No, I think it's good. I thought it made a reference to it being a crime, and that may be a problem. That may need to be removed, but otherwise I think it's okay.
Okay. I don't see any reference to crime in this one.
Okay. Might have been a different one.
Yeah, it seemed to say someone would be that a person who engages in either of the following would be deemed to be engaged in the practice of master's level or clinical psychotherapy and shall be required to have a license issued by the board to practice psychology as a licensed clinical psychotherapist or licensed master's level psychologist if one of those two conditions applied. If either the location of the client was within the state or they were representing themselves as a master's level psychologist or clinical psychotherapist within the state. So
I think it's good then.
Okay. And I don't have any recommended changes either. Any members of the advisory committee have questions or recommended changes? Okay. Well, it looks like we did drop down to 5 members, so we are one less than quorum. So we'll just go ahead and table this one and keep it for the next meeting. So.
All right. And speaking of next meetings, that would be Wednesday, December 3rd, 1 p.m. over Zoom. If we have no other business, we can't even take a vote to adjourn. So we'll just say goodbye and hope everybody has a great rest of your week.
Bye, you too.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you for your time.
See ya.
All right, bye.